Welcome to part 2 of 3 about African civilizations. Today, we will be talking about Axum, the Swahili Coast, and the beginning of Islamic influence in Africa. Axum was a city-state in the northern part of what is present-day Ethiopia. Axum is one of the oldest continuously inhabited places in Africa. It is known as an important naval trading power in this region from about 400 CE to the 10th century CE. Axum was the center of the Axumite kingdom, and mentionings of this kingdom predate even the earliest Roman writing, so it's been around a long time. They had a highly productive plow-based agricultural system and are known for their active participation in Red Sea and Indian Ocean commerce. Their major port, called Adulis, will be the main source of their trade. Axum is known for their art and architecture. It's also most specifically well known for their obelisks. An obelisk is the tall stone structure seen in the picture. They were usually erected as grave markers for important or royal people. The taller and more ornate ones were for rulers. They could be on average about 100 feet tall. Axum was very powerful and took control of their surrounding area, even taking over Meroe, who we talked about in our last episode. They also used a tribute system to collect payment from their conquered peoples. The Romans thought so highly of Axum that they considered Axum the third major empire. They said the first was Persia, then second, the Romans, and the third major empire was Axum. That's pretty high praise. Christianity gets introduced to Axum in the 4th century CE as it trickles down from the Roman Empire. The king of Axum at the time, King Izana, converts to Christianity around the same time Emperor Constantine does in Rome. Christianity will really take root in this region, and they will be linked to the Egyptian Coptic Church, which is just the type of Christianity that they practiced in Egypt. Although Islam will gain many converts in this region, even today, about 50% of the population still practices Christianity. So you can see that it really did take root in a very strong and permanent way here in Axum. Between the 4th and the 6th century CE, Axum will expand their empire into Meroe and across the Red Sea into Yemen and up to the gates of Mecca. The downfall of Axum will really be soil exhaustion, erosion, and deforestation. So they basically destroy their environment and can't support themselves there anymore. The rise of Islam will also start to change trading patterns in this region. Islamic merchants really only want to trade with other Islamic merchants. They have something in common, they feel safer around them, they share common beliefs. So lots of Islamic merchants will start skipping Axum because they are traditionally Christian in their society. Later on, we see that this area will emerge as Ethiopia, which is what it's called today. The Swahili Coast is a coastal area in Southeast Africa inhabited by the Swahili people. Throughout this period of history, the Swahili Coast peoples are known all over the world, from places like Africa to Europe, the Middle East, and they even had contact with India and China for trade purposes. The Swahili people are more of a cultural group than an organized political group. Their language stems from the Bantu people, which we talked about previously. But it also has a lot of influence from the Persians and other Arab trade partners. So it shows that they really did have a lot of outside influence on their society. They have a unique blend of traditional African and outside language stems. Arab and Indian traders would come to the Swahili Coast to trade things like bananas, cinnamon, and pepper in exchange for gold, ivory, and slaves. So again, another great example of long-distance trade of just luxury items. So none of these things are things that they need to survive. It's all things that the wealthy people just want to have. It's also important to note here that Europeans were not the first to engage in an African slave trade, though the main difference will be that these Arab and Indian slave traders do not exclusively enslave African people. It's really more like people they see as other. It doesn't necessarily have to do with race. It's just, non-Arab people or non-Indian people that they'll enslave. The Swahili Coast is really known as this giant trade network. They're very knowledgeable about monsoon wind patterns specifically, And this is what allows them to have such long-distance trade partners like the Indian people. So for example, they knew that from November to February that the Indian people would be arriving on the Swahili Coast. And then from April to September, the Swahili people can go to India. We do have great examples of the Swahili people going into some of the major Indian port cities during this time period. The Swahili Coast thrived until the Portuguese arrive on the east coast of Africa in the early 1500s. The Portuguese are going to totally destroy these cities and take over the gold trade specifically. That's what they wanted. And this is what will ultimately end trade and, basic existence as they know it of the Swahili Coast people. We are now going to transition into our segment of Islam spreading into Africa. We're going to look at several different locations in Africa and how Islam got there, what their influences are over these areas, and how this affects trade, customs, and overall belief systems in Africa. I'd like to start us off with a quote. Islam reached Africa through two gateways, from the east and from the north. From both directions, the carriers of Islam navigated across vast empty spaces, the waters of the Indian Ocean, and the sands of the Sahara Desert. Both ocean and desert, which so often are considered to be barriers, could be crossed with appropriate means, transportation, and navigational skills. And they were, in fact, excellent transmitters of religious and cultural influences. Densely populated lands, on the other hand, functioned as filters, their numerous layers slowing down their infiltration of religious and cultural influences. So this is from the introduction to the history of Islam in Africa. Basically, what the author is saying is that the geography of Africa, the barriers that keep people away from each other, like deserts and mountains, actually lend well to the spread of religion. When people live close together, spreading a new religion meets too many obstacles to be successful. But if people are more spread out, it's easier to spend time preaching your message to smaller groups, and you'll actually be able to convert more people. Egypt will be the first African country that Islam eventually spreads to and kind of takes over. The Muslim conquest of Egypt will happen in 642 CE, only 10 years after the death of its founder Muhammad. So if you think about just how fast this religion is spreading, it's already changing continents 10 years after the founder's death, much quicker than Christianity or any of the other religions we've looked at so far. Before the Muslim conquest in 642 CE, Egypt was predominantly Christian. Remember, they were specifically Coptic Christians. And Christians will remain a small minority group of the Egyptian population after the Muslim conquest of Egypt, but the Egyptian majority will practice Islam from here on out into their present history. Arab traders will take Islam into an area they call the Maghreb, which is present-day Tanzania, Algeria, and Morocco. It is important to note, though, that Islam does not convert all of Africa overnight. It isn't until the 12th century that Islam becomes the main religion of the African continent. And remember, it came first to Egypt in the 7th century, so it takes them several hundred years to gain this kind of influence. One interesting development that you'll see in North Africa is that with Islam will also come Arab culture. The people there will speak and write in Arabic and adopt many other customs from the Arab culture. No other converts to Islam on the African continent do this besides North Africa. All right, we've made it to the end of part 2 of 3 about African cultures. Next time, we'll focus more on the spread of Islam to other parts of Africa and talk about the trans-Saharan trade route. Thanks for watching.